All right, we're here with Jon Russell, and I appreciate you coming in.
Oh, great being here, Oscar. It's a long time we've known each other, and get a
Yeah,
chance to really kind of sit down for the first time and chat a little bit. I'm pleased, and it's I'm thrilled to make the trip over here.
yeah, I appreciate you coming. Like I say, you are kind of a legend in Muskegon here. You've been here long enough now, where you kind of kind of fit that legend.
Is legend code for unemployed? Is that?
Yeah, I think it does actually. Yeah, it's like everybody I've interviewed has been unemployed, so yeah, it kind of works that way.
Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate. Thank you. Thanks. You're very kind. Thank you.
So how did you get started in radio? Where'd you start?
Well, actually, I started. I've always been from Muskegon. I actually. The way I started was a kid that I went to Muskegon High School, and a classmate of mine was listening to the radio one day, WTRU over in
Okay.
Muskegon. That was the big, 1600.
Oh, yeah.
That was the happening station. For a little AM, it was a powerful station and all that stuff. I mean, not powerful power wise, but just the influence and everything.
Right.
Always impressed by the people they got here. I mean, they get people come here from Cleveland, from Detroit. It was amazing. But anyhow, my buddy, who I had no inkling that he was interested in radio, nor had I was kind of a shy kid. I mean, if you would have told me, hey, you're going to spend 40 years in radio when I was, 16 years old, I'd say you're nuts. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it probably isn't going to be radio. But I was listening to TRU one day, and I heard this guy said, Steve Ryan's here with you, blah, 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 and all this stuff. And he had a contest, and I called up, won the contest, and I said, hey, because his last name wasn't Ryan, that was his radio name. I says, I went to school with this Steve. I said, are you Steve? And I mentioned his last name, and he paused, and he said, yeah. Like I was like a bill collector or something. And I said, no. I said, this is John, and I gave him my name, and all. Oh yeah, okay, how you doing? And he says, I said, how'd you get involved in that? And he said, well, I slept with the program director, and and he was really had a neat sense of humor, and we just talked a little bit. Didn't have a lot of time to talk to him, but I kind of hooked up with him through that, and I thought, man, if it's kind of the old thing. If Steve can do it, I guess I could, because
Yeah.
I guess it humanizes it to a point. All of a sudden it's somebody you actually know that's doing it, so you don't have to be a god, you don't have
Right.
to, you don't walk on water or anything like that. And then we struck up a friendship again because a few years. This is a few years after high school. I was in college. I was an overachiever because I went to community college. It took me 4 years to get a 2-year degree. So we were supposed to get your 2-year degree associates. It took me 4 years just screwing around. But during that time, I caught up with Steve again. And he's from California originally, and he says, I'm not going to be here very long. I'm going to go back to California, and his idol was Freddie Prinze.
Okay.
And he actually had a bit of a relationship with him. They were pen pals because Steve wanted to get into stand-up comedy and stuff like that. Well, of course, when Freddie killed himself, that was a dark day for Steve. But anyhow, Freddie had opened some doors for Steve at like the comedy clubs in LA, and Steve was going to go back to LA, and he says, hey man, he said, why don't you come back with me and do some things? And I said, wait a minute. I said, I'm not a stand-up comedian. And he says, no, but you think funny. He said, you could write, he said, write
Yeah.
for me, I said, well, yeah, well, one thing led to another. My father he had a stroke my senior year in high school, and it wasn't the right time for me, and he went. And then he came back not shortly after that, probably 6 months later, and I hooked up with him again. I found him on another radio station in Grand Rapids. And I said, what's up? He said, man, he says, holy cow. He says, it was all right. I was doing okay, but you got to have material every day. I mean, you can't be doing the same stuff all the time. And he said it just was a meat grinder. So anyhow, he kind of gave me I said, so I'm thinking about doing this. What do I got to do? He says, well, what you got to do, you got to get, at that time, you had to get your third-class license, and you had to get a broadcast endorsement back then, so you had to test for it.
Oh, jeez.
So we found out where there was a test. I did, and went to a hotel like a Ramada Inn in Grand Rapids because that's what they did at certain points. And he says, the thing you got to do, he says, you'll pass your third-class license, but he says you're going to flunk your endorsement because everybody does. The endorsement was really an engineering test. I mean, very technical. And, of course, I'm not technical at all. And he was right. I flunked that. But he says, no big deal. You take it again, same answer, no trick questions. And so I took it again and passed. And wound up working, got a job at KBZ in Muskegon. Klaus Helfers was, I don't know if you remember him.
I remember Klaus, yeah.
Klaus, he did a sports talk show.
Yeah.
So they hired me to kind of engineer, board op that show. And then as a bonus, I would get, and when he was done, I would get to spin music up to Tiger Baseball, because they had Tiger Baseball back then. So I'd get, probably an hour or something like that of a show. And then up until midnight, if the game got over at 10 o'clock, I could spin music again until midnight. So that's kind of how it started. Worked there for a couple of years, but I was really just working very one day a week, And
do you remember what year that was exactly?
Yeah, that was 19. I tell you exactly what year, 1980, because the song "Sailing" by Christopher Cross had just hit, and that was like you couldn't turn on a radio without hearing it. And I loved the song back then, so I'd play that. I mean, that was the first song. If there's a trivia question, what's the first song Jon Russell ever played on radio? It was "Sailing" by Christopher Cross, and it was just, man, it's like, and it was such a rush that you're playing something that, you're locked into, people that, hey, I'm playing this, and I don't know what, how many millions of people are listening, in your fantasies, but it was kind of cool. And
fantasies, because I say you are talking KBZ here.
Yeah. Actually, the lady across the street was listening. She had her window open now. But so that was cool. But I was looking to get more hours. That wasn't happening there, and had a cousin who knew a guy that worked for a station in Fremont. I didn't even know Fremont had a radio station. And he said he was leaving, and so his position would be open. And he gave me the name of the owner, and his name was Stu Nordyke. He owned the station, owned it since 1960. It was a mom and pop. He and his wife owned it. Called on a Saturday trying to set up an appointment for a Monday for Stu Nordyke. Well, this is a Saturday. I call up, and the guy answers the phone, radio. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, hi, I'm John, and blah, blah, blah. And I'd be interested in applying for a position. I got a tape and all that type of stuff. He says, well, I says, could I set up an appointment with Stu Nordyke? He said, you're talking to him. And I'm thinking, wow, this is the owner of the station. He's pulling a Saturday.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I'll tell you what, stop by on Monday and we'll talk. And so I stopped by on Monday. He says, how are you about working weekends? I says, and I figured that was going to be open because I knew he didn't want to drag his tired butt in every Saturday to work. So I figured that was the shift. I said, yeah. I said, weekends work. You never say no,
Right.
And he says, yeah. He said, tell you what I got. He says, you would be the weekend. I said, okay. I didn't even think about what that meant. But I soon found out. The weekend meant they weren't a 24-hour station then. They went from 6 in the morning till midnight.
Yeah.
And what that meant was on Saturday, my shift was 6 in the morning till midnight. Yeah, they had automation there. They had some tapes and stuff. But, I could, he cut out about a 3-hour sloth for me to do my stuff or whatever. And so he's very kind that way. And then he says, then Sunday I need somebody from 6 in the morning until 9 o'clock because they had a gospel show. A guy came in and did a gospel show Sunday nights at 9. And I says, what if that guy, forward thinking, what if that guy doesn't come in at 9 o'clock? He said, that never happens. This guy's always here, always comes in and all that stuff. But he says, in the event that he wouldn't come in, you'd have to handle that. And I knew nothing about gospel music, right? So I'm thinking, okay, once in a blue moon. Not lying. The first weekend I do my whole Saturday, I come in, I do my Sunday, and the guy's name was Ray. And he was an older guy. He eventually became the mayor of Fremont a few years later. Okay. But he worked at Gerber's there, and was just playtime for him, and he did a good job for it. I don't think they even paid him. I think they paid him, but he never cashed his checks. I mean, he just did it for, he just did it because he liked doing it. It was his passion. And so, I kid you not, Oscar, the very first Sunday, it gets to be 8:30, and I'm thinking, wow, because I was always a guy, even back then, I'm a half hour early usually. I just like to, you get your stuff together and all that stuff. So, okay, got to be 15 minutes to 9. No Ray. And all of a sudden, I think 10 minutes or between 10 and 5 minutes to 9, phone rings, and it's Ray. He says, hey, I'm in St. Joseph. I thought I was going to be able to get back, but I'm not. I says, okay. He says, no worries. He says, I said, I don't know anything about your music, Ray. And he says, in the back room, there's all that gospel stuff. And I did see that. But I said, I don't know any about any. He said, tell you what. He says, you can't go wrong. He says, this place is the Bill Gaither Trio. He said, Don Francisco, Sandy Patty. And he starts saying, oh, he says, so I'm writing this stuff down as fast as I can, And so I wind up playing it. The calls come in, and people are wanting requests, and I'm fine. I mean, I'm bluffing my way through this pretty good. I'm not doing the Bible verses that he did or anything like that.
Right.
I'm saying, hey, I'm here for Ray and all. And everybody was really forgiving. I mean, I just kind of kept the music going. The folks called in, dealt with them, and I think I found just about everybody's requests. So that was, I mean, they didn't run me out of town, and I thought, okay, I survived that. Well, it turned out that Ray traveled on Sundays quite regularly. And it wasn't like once every in a blue moon he was gone. He was gone quite a bit. So I started learning Christian music a little bit more because he had a library back there of his stuff.
Right.
And I found out, I was a pop music guy, right? But I found out that Dan Peake, who was with America, had just he'd left America and started a Christian career. So I saw he had an album back there. And Don Francisco was a guy I heard of, and it was more like a folky stuff. I mean, it was not the old rugged cross. There was some of that, but it was, so I thought, but you had to be careful how progressive you got,
Right.
because there were the people that wanted to hear the old rugged cross and all that. And so I learned very early to kind of mix that a little bit, but it was a great education. And, to this day, I'll pop on some of Don Francisco. Dan Peake stuff I thought was always great. I loved him with America. And so that's kind of how I equated gospel music, was through kind of my pop icons and stuff like that.
Okay. All right.
Worked there, wound up doing, am I going to, I mean, you
No, you're fine.
Okay.
You're fine. Yeah.
Probably 3 years into that, I was working weekends probably maybe 2 years. So now we're talking, I remember my first day there, June 20th of 1981.
Wow. Your memory's better than mine. That's
Well,
for sure.
that's the only, I mean, I can't tell you any other dates of when I've been sold and worked at other places and all that, but I can remember that. I guess it just was ingrained in my mind for some reason. About a year into that, they had a position open up. They had somebody leave, and their news director left, as a matter of fact. So Stu Nordyke, who was the owner of WSHN, said, hey, do you know anything about news? And I says, well, yeah. I actually did take some journalism classes in my 4 years of trying to get a 2-year degree over at MCC. So, I did, and again, it's the whole thing is you never say no, right? So, yeah. And he says, in sports, he says, well, later on he would talk about sports, but I did news. So what I would do was I worked a afternoon shift from like, what the heck was it? It was like 3 o'clock until 7. So I guess it would be your afternoon drive into early evening. But before that, I got there about noon to do the noon news. It was a farm community, Fremont. So it was back in the days where we had a half-hour block for news. A farm report was thrown in there that was done through Lansing. So but a lot of it was, and I could do actualities, like I'd talk to people on the phone or in person, tape them, carve them up, and put them on. So it was a great experience. Went to like the meetings and all that stuff and all of that. Well, that went along for a while, and then all of a sudden the boss got an opportunity to cover Notre Dame football on Saturdays. And they were going to do it for free because Notre Dame was just starting up their network. And so they weren't having to pay a rights fee. So anything they sold, anything the station sold was gravy. I mean, it was all profit.
Right.
So if you sold 100 sponsors, or you should be so lucky, but it was all your money. So it was easy money. So Stu called me in. I was working with another guy who had just graduated from Central Michigan. We were the same age, and he had a broadcasting degree, and his name was Rick Stoll. Called us in the office and said, you guys know anything about football? And I said, yeah, played it and know a little bit. And Rick was more of a basketball player. He grew up in the Detroit area, Birmingham, Groves, down in that way.
Okay.
And he said, yeah. He says, what do you think? We're doing Notre Dame football. Shouldn't we do high school football? And Rick and I had privately dreamed of doing it, not having any idea if we could do it.
Right.
But we'd always talked about, man, wouldn't it be great if we could broadcast high school sports? So we looked at each other and we said, yeah, that'd be great. Do you think you guys could do it? Certainly. I mean, we said it in unison. It was like the Beach Boys. Yes, and so we went out of his office and back to the front office where Rick worked, and we thought, man, can we really do this? And but we say we'll give it a try, and we did, and we came up with a plan. We both wanted to be play-by-play guys to get the experience because we were going to take over for Ernie Harwell when Ernie,
of course,
when Ernie, when he retired finally. So we knew we had to get some experience at play-by-play, and so what would happen was while one of us was calling play-by-play, the other would be the color, and then you'd flip in the second half of a football game. So come to find out, before our first game, he says, "How about if you take the first half of the game?" And I said, "Okay, I can do that." And I was very good at memorizing names and picking up names. He wasn't quite there. It took him a while to figure out who everybody was. And that was his mode of wanting to do that. So we would do that, and we would critique each other after. It was the most honest partner I ever had in terms of we were peers. I mean, from there on, I would always be the guy that had a few years on whoever I worked with. So I was kind of the veteran, and people, hey, what do we do, John? But this was right ground floor. We're equal. We're both the same age, and we're creating something together. And we were learning.
Right.
So we would have these critiques, and my wife and his wife used to go to the games with us. My wife, for self-preservation for me, because I lived in Muskegon still, but I was driving back and forth to Fremont. So you have to remember, my day in Fremont would start, I'd get there at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and on a Friday night, I'd be there until the game was over.
Right.
So I was dog tired. So Arlene, my wife, she says, well, I'm going to go with you so you don't fall asleep on the way home. So she was kind of but she would go to the games, her and Joyce, that was Rick's wife. And we would go back and forth, like just hammering on, not necessarily each other, but critiquing ourselves. And man, we should have done this better, and we got to do this, and how can we do? And Arlene finally said, guys, you weren't that bad. It's hey, yeah, there can be some improvement here, but we were like that. We were never really pleased with what we did. So we worked together for a couple of years, and I think the second year I kind of got a little miffed because I said, Rick, I says, hey, I'm never going to call the final touchdown, or we did basketball as well,
right,
or that final winning basket. I said, I'm stuck doing the first half.
Yeah.
And he says, you're better at it. You get the names. I said, so let me get this straight. Because you have an inability to learn here, I'm penalized, right? Is that what you're saying? He says, no. He says, look at it this way, John. He says, you always have a close game. He said, every once in a while we get these just routes, and he said, I'm stuck with a stinker.
Yeah.
And which was true.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a fair amount of that. And I said, well, that's okay. I see your logic there anyhow. But I said, you still should try to, I says, at some point, if you're going to do this, Rick, you're going to have to start a game. I mean,
right,
you're going to, so, but he never did. I mean, as long as we worked together, that was always the thing. It was, and it was good. It was good training for both of us because we got a chance to sit in each other's chairs. I mean, color and play-by-play and stuff like that. So we did that for 2 years. He finally came to me one day and says, I got to do something else. I'm not making any money. And his wife's father was kind of insisting that he take care of their little girl, And Rick had a history of teachers in his family. His mom and dad were both teachers. And he says, and that's kind of what I come from, and I'm used to summers off. What are the best 3 reasons about being a teacher? June, July, and August. He used to joke about that. So he went back to school, got his teaching degree, and he left. And then I worked with another guy there for a while. And then eventually Cal, who I work with to this day, he was doing public relations. He was doing PA for the Grant Tigers, like their basketball games. And he called me up one day and he said, wanted to have lunch. And he says, hey, John, he says, and I was working with somebody else at that point. He says, I'd always like to try that, and from then on, when Rick left, I was always play-by-play. I mean, whoever I worked with was the colors.
Yeah.
So, he says, I'd love if you got an opening, to come in and try. And I said, sure. He said, you never know what happens. Well, a couple of years ago, this other guy leaves, and I have Cal, and we'd been together for 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what we
Well,
did.
I had you guys. Well, you guys were calling games on. I think it was LCS at the time,
Yeah.
and I was covering some games,
Yes.
videotaping them.
Yep.
And you were nice enough to let me just put a mic down there, so you guys did the play-by-play for
Sure.
it, and we used that. I was like TV40, I think we put it on or
Yeah.
something. So
Yeah. No, that was
Yeah,
good experience.
that
we
was
had
fun.
the face for a radio, but
well, I was gonna follow you around, and I forgot what happened. Something came up.
yeah,
or the
I
money
remember that
wasn't there or
we almost
something
worked
happened.
together, didn't we?
Almost, yeah. So now, Moyes and Young, did they play any influence in your
You know,
broadcasting?
Jim, of course, he'd been around forever. I mean,
Right.
back when I was a kid, I'd listen to his games. In fact, on Facebook, I just messaged him. He sent me some well wishes, when I lost my job here, and so I told him what I told him. I said, you were kind of the godfather of anybody that did play-by-play sports in Muskegon because you were who we listened to, and so. Our paths were pretty good because we were up in Newaygo County for about 20 years.
Okay.
But he would cross. I mean, like maybe the Heights would play Fremont, so we would see Jim and Gene then.
Yeah.
And we always had very cordial relationships. So always treated us well and encouraging and stuff like that. Well, when my boss, by this time, Stu had kind of passed the torch on to his son Don Nordyke, and he bought, and this would have been the late 1990s.
Yeah, I remember. I was there.
Yeah, they bought LCS and Eagle,
Yeah.
and another AM station,
Right.
and
One right next door.
yeah,
to
they
me,
they
yeah.
bought it, I guess, for a song. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
because they were
Yeah,
stations that were
Yeah, I worked for Carson, and Carson
Yes.
was buying up all these repeaters, and he went broke buying all these repeaters, so he needed money to keep buying them, so he sold us for nothing. you
Yeah.
know. And that's when I had just come back because I had actually worked at GV. I went from LCS and got hired over at GVU, Grand
Okay.
Valley,
right.
and worked there for 4 or 5 years. And I was just going to come back because Bob Bolton at that time was getting me back in. Well, I wasn't real comfortable with the whole situation, so I
Right.
tried to get my job back at GVU. And anyway, that
Yeah,
didn't happen. But yeah, the whole thing was
Yeah.
that Carson was looking for money, so he sold it for nothing. I
He
mean,
sold it,
we
yeah.
worked. It was kind of hard because we all worked our butt off at that station, and
yes,
a lot of times we go without paychecks, and
Right.
because Carson was not a good owner.
no, that's
Right.
what I heard.
Yeah,
And I'll tell you, when we took over LCS, I mean, that was a really happening station. I mean, there was a great listenership
Yeah.
of that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and it was kind of interesting because a lot of it would be, I think it was the ABC syndication classic hits. And what they did, one of the packets that you got was they would show where they got all their requests from.
right.
And Muskegon, or this West Michigan area, was among the leaders of all classic hits formats. I mean, as far as it was a phenomenal. And of course, like I said, this is late 90s, But yeah, Don buys that. And the plan for him eventually is to move the operations to Muskegon, or at least, the LCS operations. And so we kind of go along a little bit and we expand our, at least sports coverage on LCS. We wanted to put, I can't remember if they had sports before. I'm
Yeah,
sure they did
we
at one time.
Well, we had Moyes and Young there, and
Yeah.
I stole them away at WGVU,
Okay, all right.
and then they went over to Rock.
Yes.
I think is where they went. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, and that's where they were when we wanted to open up sports on LCS. That was kind of an awkward time for the Gene Young, Jim Moyes, Jon Russell, Cal Van Single relationship, because now all of a sudden we come down here and we're in their backyard.
Right.
And I think everybody handled it gracefully. I mean, to be honest with you, I know there were some bit of hard feelings here and there, but right away, I didn't deal with Jim so much, but I dealt with Gene quite a bit.
Right.
And Gene and I sat down, and we came to an agreement. We says, hey, look, and this is football season again, because I don't believe by that time I think they pretty much gave up on basketball. I don't think they
Right.
were doing too
Yeah.
much basketball,
Right.
if any. But football is kind of king around here,
Right.
obviously. And Gene and I would go out to lunch before the season would start, and we'd say, and we both had the plan, and we said, hey, let's figure out a schedule, and try not to be at the same place.
Right.
And I don't know if Jim necessarily appreciated that so much, because Jim wanted to be where he wanted, and I get
yeah.
that,
Oh, yeah.
and I totally get all of that. I mean, here's a guy that's done it forever. You got kind of the new kids on the block coming in. I mean, we had 20 years up in Newaygo County,
Right.
but that's 20 years up in Newaygo County. I mean,
Right.
so we weren't exactly new kids on the block, but we weren't the primary in the Muskegon, like you're following a legend in
Right.
Jim. So I got all of that, and and meanwhile I'm getting pressure from. By this time we're sold to Citadel, and so I don't have the mom and pop, the Nordikes anymore, where you could go down to the hall and say, hey, I'd like to do this. It became corporate radio, and it
Right.
was different. It was an adjustment. Not always a good adjustment, but it was an adjustment.
Yeah.
But
And I think that's why we couldn't work together, because something that had to do with Citadel, I think is what it was. When that
you know,
when that-
you know what? We were probably going through bankruptcy at that time,
Okay.
and they
Yeah.
had a hiring freeze. I'll bet you that's what it was.
that could have been, yeah.
Yeah, there was.
It
Yeah.
was like, man, I finally found some great
Yeah.
announcers I can use for
Yeah.
for doing the sports, and yeah.
Well,
okay.
Nordike, getting back to him, just on the sale of the stations. Now he sold the whole packet, all of his stations, to Citadel,
Hmm.
and I don't know what the price was, but I've heard astronomical numbers.
Yeah,
I mean, he
yeah.
did well on
Right,
that sale.
Right.
And so they overpaid. Basically, Citadel overpaid for those stations. The downside of that for me, and I was the only one that came with the sale. I mean, I remember there was a guy named Jeff Morton. He was he wasn't the market manager, because Matt Hanlon was a market manager, but Jeff was his right hand guy, and he came in to do interviews, and everybody that went into the office came back. Their eyes were like this, and it was like they were just they were just a zombie. What happened? It was like one of those. Hey, what gonna?
Yeah.
I'm gone. So I'm thinking, I'm the last interview. I'm thinking I'm gone.
Yeah.
So I go in. They call me in, and Jeff says, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm doing all right." He says, "What do you think of the sale?" I says, "I think it stinks." And now keep in mind, it's not that I'm brave. It's I'm already dead.
Yeah.
I'm already, in my mind, I'm already dead. I might as well say what I'm going to say.
Right.
And so he looks at me kind of puzzled. He says, why? I said, well, this station's been up here since 1960. I know you're going to move it to Muskegon. I live in Muskegon. It'd be great for me. I mean, it's only a few blocks probably from where I live. I mean, I get all of that. Wouldn't have to drive, 60 miles round trip every day through snow and sleet and all that stuff. But I says the bottom line is the people up here are losing a radio station, and they're losing a touch with their community and all that stuff. And he said, well, he says things change or something like that. And he goes on, and I proceed to tell him everything that he doesn't want to hear. I know he doesn't, because he's looking at me like, he'd ask me a question. I was just being honest. I wasn't being disrespectful, but I was being honest. I thought I was gone. And I said, hey, this is my exit interview. I'm not going to sit here and beg for my job. And I said, I don't even know if I want to work for, because I had heard stories about about not only Citadel, but just corporate radio in general.
Right.
About how it was. And so I said, I don't even know if I want to do this, to be honest with you. So I had this really frank interview. It probably lasted a half an hour. Like I said, I didn't tell him anything he wanted to hear. I know I did. And at the end of that, Oscar, he says to me, I need an operations manager. You want the job? And I'm thinking, if you wrote a textbook on how not to interview, I just wrote it. I mean, there is nothing that you would say, well, the first thing you ought to do is you ought to be contrary to everything this guy wants to do. And then, I mean, it was, but in hindsight, he needed one person. And that's what I found out later on. He got in this conversation with Don, he says, I can take one person. Who would that one person be? He says, it's a no-brainer. It'd be John, because he can do everything.
Oh, okay.
And that's not not bragging on my part, but small radio. You know,
Right.
you've
Yeah, I
done that.
know.
You do
Yeah.
everything. You know,
Yeah.
so that was more of that than, hey, John's such a great talent and all that stuff. I happen to think that was prouder. No. but anyhow, so that was it. So I had that job no matter what I was going to say. Apparently, I did not know that. Because I am gobsmacked when he says, "Do you want to be my," And I remember thinking, God, didn't he just hear for a half an hour? I'm trying to think of anything I could have said positive. And I said, well, yeah, I'll give it a chance. So I thought at that point, Oscar, that I was going to be the transition, because when we went to the studios where we are now, there was not even furniture in there. I mean, the computers were sitting on the floor, and we had some old chairs that we brought from Nordike's place, and that was it. And we were playing PSAs. We weren't even playing because the sales staff who went down, they did go,
Okay.
but they quit right away
Yeah.
almost, because they didn't like the guy that Citadel had brought in to be the sales manager for the Muskegon office. And so they were all the guys I worked with, who I thought I was going to at least go with. When I show up, it's just me and this other guy, the sales manager. We're the only two in the building. And I thought,
Now,
wow.
what building did you go to then?
We went to with where we are now. It's called Heritage Heritage Shoot. Well, it's on Miriam Street in Muskegon Heights.
Okay.
It's actually, what's kind of ironic is it's across the expressway from Clear Channel, iHeart.
Okay.
It's directly. I mean, in fact, you see our tower and their towers. I mean, and we'd get their winners on MUS, and they would get our winners. I mean, it was kind of because you couldn't even say, hey, we're by the Denny's, because they were right by the Denny's. We were kind of by the Denny's, but that was a landmark. But we were across the street, so that's the general area where it was.
Yeah.
But we went in there and we had nothing. And I thought, God, this ain't going to last. I mean, we weren't even playing commercials. We were playing PSAs and stuff like that. And we didn't have a sales staff. And I thought, this is going to not, my transition here isn't going to be long. Well, lo and behold, we wound up hiring a staff. And I brought in a guy that worked with us, Rick Hickman,
Right.
he and I did a morning show up in Fremont for probably 10 years anyhow. And it was a country station then. And we did that together. And Rick and I were just really just had a lot in common. I mean, we could finish each other's sentences. He had the same sense of weird humor that I had, and it worked. Well, he winds up, his day job was with Michigan Works up in Newaygo County. Fast forward a little bit, Michigan Works is taken over by the school system. So their people are going to take it over. Rick loses his job. He was still board opping and engineering the football games and basketball games for us. So he actually came down here for a year and did that. I mean, it was hardly any money for him, but it was something.
Right.
And meanwhile, again, Jeff Morton comes back and he says, hey, we need some salesmen here. You got any idea of anybody? I said, well, Rick comes down. I said, he needs a job. So I asked Rick, and Rick said, I don't know anything about sales. I said, man, you care about people. You would be great at it. He said, I'll give it a shot. So I told Morton, I says, the only thing, I said, the thing you're going to get on Rick about is Rick is going to be weird for a salesman, because he's going to actually want this to work for not only us, but for the client. I don't think Jeff was too thrilled about hearing that either, because again, here's a little backhanded jab at salesmen. But some salesmen go in and they get paid on commission. I get that. I totally get that. But you can't go into a business and look around and say, wow, there's no money here. And I've heard business owners say that when certain salesmen walk in, that's what they see. They just see it in their eyes, like, oh boy, did I make a mistake. Yeah, here's my card, but don't bother calling. I mean, they're not saying that, but they're thinking it. And Jeff said, well, that's kind of a shot. And I said, well, no. I said, but you're going to have to let him find himself, because he's going to spend more time than you want him to spend with a client to land him. But I said, what's going to happen when Rick gets a client? This guy's going to be with him for a long time.
Yeah.
And so you're just going to have to be patient with that. And so, okay, cool. I appreciate that. And that's exactly how Rick worked. It took a while, but up till the day that Rick wound up quitting or retiring, his client file was a phenomenal percentage of the same people that he sold, and we were together there 20 years, because I think I was 20 years in Fremont, 20 years here. So I had 20 years of mom and pop radio and 20 years of corporate radio. So it was kind of a unique perspective for that. But yeah, that was, and then he grew our pregame show to just, and postgame show especially, just a whole network of stuff, and that's what made us difference. But I'm bouncing around here, but yeah, Gene and I worked very well together. Jim came around eventually, and not that it was anything, but I could always tell that there was the thing. But then at a point, we were doing as many games as they were, so it was
Right.
kind of I think we worked it really well through what Jim was able to, or not, Gene was able to, and I were able to broker. And then when Gene wound up leaving or pulling back because he had some health issues, Tom Kendra came in, and Tom and I always got along from the time that he, worked at the Chronicle and all that stuff.
Right, I remember
and
that.
and we just carry that whole tradition on. Lunchtime, and about this time of year, we're doing this in July, and that'd be about the time Tom and I'd sit down and say, hey, look, here's the 9 games. We'd like to have these games. You'd like to have these. Okay, well, we really want to be at this one. Okay, well, we'll give you this game if you take that. It was, and that's how it went.
Right.
And it worked out. It worked out well. I think probably their bosses kind of looked askew at that a little bit, and our bosses did too. It's like, well, hey, wait a minute, why are we brokering a deal here with these?
Yeah.
And we said, hey,
Yeah, Jim and Gene didn't answer to any bosses. So.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Jim and Gene were
Yeah.
their bosses. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you know what? I was pretty autonomous with what I did too, because they didn't, as long as we were bringing in bucks, they really
Yeah.
didn't care.
I mean, football was it. I mean,
Yeah.
speaking, you made money in football. It was
Yeah.
radio, you made money. TV, you made money.
Right.
I mean, you just made
Yeah.
money in football because
Yeah.
that was what people loved to
Sure.
hear about and see. Yeah.
Yeah, and basketball became kind of a value added for us
Yeah.
anyhow. It was like, okay, you get the season, you get football, and then we're going to basically throw in a basketball season. I
Yeah.
mean, it'd be a little premium, but it wouldn't be. I mean, nobody would. I hate to say this, but you could count on one hand, maybe one finger, the people that would say,
Yeah.
hey, I really want basketball.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
just, it was not the same. It was the same gravitas as
Yeah,
football.
cool.
But yeah, no, and then we moved here, and I kind of did the same. I was operations manager. I guess they called me / program director, and sports guy here in Muskegon for 20 years, and it was a great ride. I
Yeah.
did a show. Rick and I we wound up doing a Monday through Friday show for about 5 years, morning drive, and then he left.
Now, was that on LCS or
Yes,
was that
it
on,
was.
Okay.
Yes, it was. And then he turned 62, and he decided to retire. He'd kind of had enough of it. His wife is from Reed City, and she wanted to go back home. She'd been down here, for a lot of that time, all of that time, and she wanted to go back home. And he said, no, I can retire, and I will. And that's what he did. And that was a blow to the gut to me, because you're losing your best friend,
Yeah,
you're losing your partner in crime. I always said I was very fortunate in radio to always have at least one person at any radio station that I worked with. I always call it kind of the reality check. It's like, okay, hey, tell me, somebody's nuts here. Is it me or is it them? I mean, somebody, and there was always somebody that even if they were kind, they would say, no, they're out of whack. They have no idea. And I said, okay. And Rick Hickman was that for me. Rick Stoll was that for me over in Fremont for a lot of years. And Dale Williams was that way when I worked with him over there. So I always was blessed with that. When I lost Rick, I didn't have that anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have the reality check of, wow, these guys are doing some really strange stuff here. Am I losing it, or is it? I didn't have anybody saying, no, they're still nuts. So,
Now your name, as far as your name goes, that's your real name you've used all these years, right?
it's not my real name.
Oh, it's not.
No, it's my, but it's the name I use, because once I used it, I kind of, that's who I was.
I just thought it was.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, everybody does. And that's the awkward part now, is when you're going back, because people have known me forever as Jon Russell. My real name is John Chaney.
Okay.
And so the awkward part that I'm finding right now, because if we if I go into this next generation of broadcasting, and I've got some irons in the fire that we can talk about if you want to at some point, but is I set up I actually set up a Jon Russell email because I thought, well, because now you got to explain all of that stuff.
Right.
Hey, you've known me for 40 years as Jon Russell, but really I'm John Chaney, and that just is to me it's awkward.
Well, Mark Dixon, he has two different websites. His real Facebook rather.
Oh,
his real name and his Mark Dixon.
So Dixon's not his real name either.
No.
Okay.
No. Now that was something that Tim Ackerhoff came up with.
Oh, was it?
Years ago, yeah.
Yeah. Mine was just I had to do a newscast, and I thought, God, I need a name. And everybody asked me, was that a middle name? Was that like your grandfather's name? No, I needed a name, and Russell came. And and then once I said it, I was hip enough to say, even if I don't like it, I got to stick with it, because you can't be Jon Russell one week and then I'll say, oh no, I'm going to be John Rivers the next week. Or, no, I think I'm going to be John. You have to, you can't be changing it.
Have you ever ran into Bob Ecker on any time?
I have. He actually works with us.
Okay, Bob works with you now. Okay.
Yeah, actually, he's had 2 incarnations with us. I first ran into Bob when he was working with Jim and Gene.
Right.
And they had an AM station too. I'm going to say Jim and Gene were on like the Rock FM, and then there was an AM station.
Right.
Maybe it was KBZ even.
Yeah. Well, they changed it to KBZ. Yeah, it used to be MUS, but they changed it to KBZ. Yeah.
But they did that for years. So we actually knew Bob and Gary. Gary Weber was his partner for a lot of years.
Yeah,
and when we would run across each other again up in the Newaygo County area, and then we came down here. And then about the time that Jim left, they were only going to cut to one crew. I'm a little foggy on the details, but they weren't going to do anything, and we wound up losing on V100, which was our R&B station in our cluster that we're at now. I always thought cluster was such an appropriate,
not a good name, yeah.
appropriate name for several stations.
Yeah.
But anyhow, our
loving group.
Yeah, yeah. So what we had was. We had somebody doing Big Reds football on our R&B station. Well, they wound up leaving, and we had an opening, and I called Bob up, and it was exactly the right time, because Bob was, I think, leaving that AM station, or they were leaving him. And I said, hey, and he was a Big Red. I didn't really necessarily know that, but he graduated from Muskegon.
Right.
And he said, I guess that was always kind of his secret fantasy as far as sports, is he wanted to be, start like kind of a Big Reds network and do that. So it fit right in. Mm-hmm. And we had him on board for a few years. And the LCS, just because we had a good base, always sold well. But for some reason, the Big Reds just didn't sell. I mean, we got some sponsors, but LCS always was able to outsell them. There was a price that certain Big Red people would pay, but they wouldn't pay. But I think I had somebody from the Big Reds tell me one time. He says, our guys are getting hit up. Our sponsors are getting hit up for if you need a scoreboard, they're putting the big money into the pro. They would want to put their money into the program as opposed to covering the program. You know what I mean? So, we got that, but it was tough. So we had to cut back on that one year. That was a corporate decision. And then Bob actually ended a job with another radio station, kept that going to his credit, and did that for another maybe 5 years. And then he called me just the year before last, and he wasn't happy where the coverage wasn't that great, having trouble, just different troubles.
Right.
He said, would your group consider bringing us back? And I said, I'll ask. And I did, and they were, and we got him back. So, yeah, we were kind of partners, he would just handle all the Big Red stuff. So I consequently, even though I was a Big Red, did very few Big Red games because, the time that he did that. So we stayed with the true game of the week that didn't involve the Big Reds. Every once in a while we would wind up, doing a Big Red game or something. And the thing I've always appreciated about Bob was usually anybody else I worked with, like I would have to set up, like do all of their groundwork for them. I'd have to call the athletic directors at the schools, which I did for me anyhow. But it was double the work.
Right.
Because, okay, but from day one when I had Bob, He preferred to work that way.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
then he knew what he was up against, who he was talking to, who he was dealing with. And I said, man, because I think he said, do you mind if I set that up or something? I said,
Yeah.
man, no. I said, I didn't think you wanted any part of that. I said, go to it, knock yourself out. And he did. I would never have to hear anything from him. You know what I mean? I mean, he was like, wind him up.
Oh, yeah.
He's gone.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's
he was,
gone. Now, early days, you speak about setting things up because I was program director at KBZ at a time when Jim and Gene were over there,
right.
and you had to set up the phone lines at all
Yes.
these different places, because they did through the phone line. And
Sure.
The only time that Jim really got mad at me, really hated me, was when I sent him with a bag phone one time, and that was not a good thing.
Yeah.
But you had to set them all up. Now, did you set yourself up every time back in the
Yes.
day? I mean, you had to get a phone line. It was a lot of work. I
It
mean,
was.
You had to set the phone line up. You had to get it, make sure it was a working line. Sometimes you get there, the line wasn't working. You had to call somebody. You had to know somebody in the.
Yes.
That's why I got to know John Van Wyck very well.
Yeah.
I'd call him and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
his phone line's not working. Can you get somebody over there to fix it?" And
Yeah. No.
you did all that. I mean,
Oh, no.
did you have some troubles with that?
Oh,
or-
I had, yeah. I mean, there was, that you had to deal with a phone company, and then you had to get a specific line. You had to get like a business. I remember, I didn't even know what that was, but I knew the magic words were get a business one phone line. It was a
Right,
clear
right.
line. I mean,
Clear
it was,
line, yeah.
Yeah, and you had to do that. I learned that very, very early. But you would sweat that because, and then the company, no matter who I worked for, hated phone bills.
Right.
Be it Nordyke or whatever. And they would put up with it for a while, but after a while, I would get to the point where they'd say, well, we're not going to put a phone in there. In the early days, we had, which was pretty high tech for the time, it was called a Marty unit.
Yeah.
And,
We used a Marty quite a bit too, but
yeah.
sometimes,
Sometimes you couldn't.
you
I
couldn't,
mean, if you're
yeah.
on the road, I mean, it only had so much of a coverage area.
Right.
But yeah, and that's where that would come in. Hey, there was a big game that was out of our area, and a lot of times, boy, I put it in at my cost. I lost money on doing
Really?
sports. Yeah.
Wow.
Because I just thought it was important to do it. Arlene, bless her heart, because that could have led to a divorce for a lot of people. I mean, we couldn't even pay our own bills.
Right.
And she's saying, what the hell are you doing? I said, we can't even keep our own phone on, and you're getting this other bill. I said, I know, but I said, man, this is what we do. And
Yeah.
and I did that, and I didn't turn it in because I didn't want the grief. And a lot of times what would happen with me was I would turn phone bills in, and sometimes they wouldn't get paid. And then I'm thinking, well, shit, that's good, because I would hear, from the phone companies, well, it looks like you got an outstanding SHN's got an outstanding phone bill that they haven't. And so I'm thinking, well, that's going to screw me up down the line. So it would be almost like I would take on some of that myself just to take care of it.
Right.
And I would pay those bills, as silly as it is, and it was silly. I would pay a lot of those bills before I'd pay my own phone bill.
Now, was this Don that did this, or was this his father?
This is back pretty much with Stu and all that.
Okay.
He did not like phone bills. He
Okay.
did not. I mean, he would eventually pay them, but I'm not saying that I paid them all, but there was, if I paid 2 or 3 of them, that was a big hit for me, because I remember the installation. You were okay, like if you were at a place that actually had phone lines before,
Right.
because
So they just turn it
they
on,
could just turn on the jack. So I think it was only maybe like $50 to turn it on.
Yeah.
But if you had to put the whole works in, I mean, you're looking at $100, $120.
Yeah. And it's
and,
like
and I was
the
making
big-
$50
it's
a
like-
game.
Yeah, it's like the big game, so you got to have it in
Yes.
there. And yeah.
And you would worry, or I'd worry all that. I used to say, until I got hooked up and I heard that dial tone, it was like, it was
Yeah,
like, because you'd worry all the way to the game.
Oh yeah,
You
like
know?
I said, there's lots of times. Like I say, Jim and Gene would get there and they say, yeah, "Oscar,
Yeah.
we've got no, we've got no signal here. We got no line." So
Yep. And next thing you know, you're making a call to whoever and
Yeah.
trying to get it on there. And
they'd have to go to a payphone or something to call me to let me know. Yeah.
I know. The adventures of radio.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. One funny story about the Marty unit, and Jim Moyes, actually, we were at Fremont, he was doing a game, and he looked, he says, "Oh my God, you got a Marty unit, huh?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, somebody's going to get killed doing one of those Marty games someday." Apparently he didn't think too highly of those.
No, he didn't like them. No.
No. But what
He
was
preferred the phone lines, which I never could understand.
yeah,
but
because it
anyway.
sounded like you're talking in a tunnel all the time.
Yeah.
Exactly. But it was a good connection. I mean, you know what I mean. Yeah. But The thing with the Marty unit was the farther away you were, you could cheat a little bit because it was all about height.
Yeah.
So we came to find out that if you had three of these long poles and then you put the antenna on top of the pole, and it was like the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima onto the back of the truck. Rick Stoll and I it was kind of funny. I remember we were at Ravenna, howling winter day, we're doing a basketball game. We put this thing up, get the thing turned to where we think the station is, and then we're good to go. Then all of a sudden we were listening to a station feed. That's the only thing that you had to listen to. Yeah. And all of a sudden we hear and I said, oh shit. You know, what happened was the wind had blown the antenna off the station, right off the direction. So one of us, whoever wasn't doing play-by-play, had to go out, return the antenna, and we had a whole, that happened more than that. So you had,
and Jim and Gene, that was way too much work. They wanted to play. Well, besides, back then they were just AM.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So it was just AM, so it wasn't really that big of a deal through the phone line. So.
Yeah.
But so those are some. I remember those days very, very well.
Yeah.
Very well when I was at KBZ. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember we did a football game at All Gray, and it was a playoff game, wintry night, very windy, and we went, and it was one of these press boxes that was straight up. It wasn't very wide, but it was like straight up, very high, and the first floor was a concession stand. Second floor was actual press box. So we climbed this rickety ladder up to the second floor, and we had a box at that time. Don Nordyke, or his brother Todd, I think, actually put together this box that had had a radio signal thing, a mixer, and a phone connection thing. So it was pretty ingenious. I mean, but it weighed about 70 pounds. I mean, it was pretty hefty. And so you're carrying this ladder between the two of us. We get up there and we're looking around, and the guy says, "No, you're not in here." So where are we at? And he pointed up, and we're looking up, and there's no ladder, and he meant on top of the roof.
Right.
And we said, "Well, how do we get out there?" And he pointed out the window, and we looked, and there's a ledge probably about 2 feet along the outside that you had to shimmy around the corner to get to a ladder that went straight up. And if you ever climbed a ladder that goes straight up,
I have,
yeah, it's, I know you,
yeah.
And we had this big box, and we got up there. Well, we Stoll. This is again back in the days with Stoll. I pity him because in the early days we have the war stories. I mean, by the time Cal came along, we were pretty civilized. I mean, we were, stuff was not so bad. We didn't have too many of those stories, but with Rick, it was like that all the time. And anyhow, we fight our way up to the top, and all of a sudden we see the camera guy for one of the teams come up, and then we see another person, and I'm thinking, who in the heck is in this press box? It's like they're sending everybody up here on this little deer blind with us. But and then it was like the wind was howling, and you had to put a bag over the microphone, or else you get the.
Now, as far as some of your favorite radios, I mean, you pretty much, I'm sure, said most of them, but you've some of your favorite radio moments that you can think of. I mean, when you did your show, you did it in the mornings.
Yes.
With Rick.
Yeah.
Now, was that one of your favorite memories as far as shows you've done?
Yeah, I mean,
the sports and all, of course, is
the sports,
favorite,
we talked about that, and that's always been fun, and for a lot of reasons. But yeah, the shows were always great. I always liked getting up in the morning and coming into work, checking the the news out. They used to have the old teletype that type of stuff, and just find out what's happening, and then and just the adrenaline of that. I mean, this is back when I started in radio. You have to remember that was the news programs really weren't there. I mean, people actually listened to the radio to find out what's going on. And that's something now that generations don't even realize what that was.
On their phone now.
Yeah, but I loved all of that. I loved the contact with the people and the people that would call in. Rick and I, when we moved over here, we did a Saturday morning show called the Saturday Morning Jukebox. We started that. What started with that was one of our stations that was Eagle here for a while. They changed it to a sports show, a sports station. They called it the Champ. We started the Saturday show because Brett Bakita was working at WBBL then, and they wanted to do a morning show, a local morning show, sports show, and so Rick and I were going to do it. But we got the wise idea of, hey, let's see how we work together again. It's been a while since we'd worked together. So let's just go in Saturday morning, 6 o'clock in the morning till 9, and we'll just play the oldies and we'll have some fun. If you're bad, who cares? It's 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday.
On a Saturday, yeah.
Well, what was funny, Oscar, was we started playing, we started talking back and forth, phones started lighting up.
Yeah.
And what we found at that time, the Muskegon Chronicle was still going. And all the Chronicle workers, or a huge amount of them, were out delivering papers, and they were calling. So they all of a sudden they called, and then when the Chronicle kind of disappeared, we thought, oh, there goes our audience, because a lot of them was that. But then we built our own audience from that. But that was funny because we did that for no pay, and we did it on the sly, and it turned into just a monster show. And I would wind up getting sound bites from Green Acres and the Beverly Hillbillies. And then we started, what was really cool was, I remember sitting around one day saying, Johnny Rivers, what, he can't be that busy anymore, why he, if I hook up with him.
It's not the Whiskey a Go-Go anymore.
Yeah. I said, these guys, it's not like they're the top line talent anymore and all this stuff, and this is what we play their stuff. I bet you he wouldn't mind talking or doing an interview. And all of a sudden, I was, going on websites or whatever, and I was just making contact with either them. Sometimes they actually answered their own emails, or I'd get their publicist and tell them what we're doing, and they would buy in. And the people we talked to, from Johnny Rivers to Art Garfunkel to Bobby Goldsboro, we did a 2-parter with him. Art was only a 1-parter because that was set up through an agency.
Okay.
Art had just done a solo album, one of his latest releases, and they said, you're only going to have 10 minutes. Well, what we like to do is we like to have 20 minutes with these guys, and then we would mix in their music.
Right.
I mean, we turned it into a whole program, an hour program, and that we would play after the jukebox, so we co-opted another whole hours.
Oh, okay.
But I told Rick, I said, hey, we got Art Garfunkel, man. He said, we only got him for 10 minutes. It's going to be a cattle call. It's going to be one of these things, he goes right from us to somebody else. And we talked with him, and he was very warm, and I had heard that depending on where he was in his life, he would either talk about Paul Simon or he wouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of those things. So we got to talk about Sound of Silence because this was on his thing, and I'm thinking, man, if he'd only talk about Paul, but I didn't say anything. And he talked about the whole story about how Paul was in England and when that song hit, and they were kind of almost in one of their they were almost broken up at that time before their first song came out. I mean, they kind of went their own separate ways for a little bit, and that song actually brought them together. And he says, Paul Simon, what a talent. Let's talk about Paul. He actually said that, and then Rick and I looked at one another, and we thought, wow.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, man, here we go. And he was just told all the stories, told about the breakup, what that was all about. Wow. He taught school for a while.
Did you record this?
I did. Yeah, I still got this stuff. I still kept all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Someday if I find something, I'd love to play that back again, and stuff. But yeah, I mean, we'd have them. We had Randy Bachman from Bachman Turner. I mean,
I talked to Randy myself too.
Great guy.
Actually, it was back at KBZ when I talked to the nudist camp, and they were having a thing called Nude Stock.
Yeah.
And he was one of the artists that was going to be at Nude Stock, and I talked to him, and he actually sent me like CDs from what he was doing in his garage at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, he's an awesome guy. He was
well,
a great
plus
guy.
he did. I don't know if he was doing it back when you talked to him, but he since and still does a radio show.
Yeah.
And it wasn't too much unlike what I think what you do with cartoons and what we did with the jukebox. It's just like kick back, tell the stories of the songs, and it's not all his stuff. I mean, if you play Tommy James and tell some stories about that and stuff. Tommy James was another. I mean, we interviewed him 2 or 3 times. Couldn't get enough of him. He's technically he's born in Dayton, but he was raised in Niles, so he always considered himself a Michigander.
Yeah.
Those are always the good stories. I mean, those are, and Rick and I just had a blast doing it. I mean, we would be tired after a game on a Friday night. Sometimes you'd only get 3 hours sleep, but you would come back in the morning, and that was just our fun time. That was just our time to, hey, nobody got killed. It was just have some fun.
When I was doing Talking Tunes on Eagle 97, I wish I would have thought of just contacting local celebrities like that are not local celebrities, but celebrities that
Oh.
have been, so to speak. But
You'd be surprised how
Yeah.
many. One of my heartbreaking stories of that was Glenn Campbell. I was always a fan of his, and I
Yeah.
knew he was doing his final tour. He had the Alzheimer's thing
right,
going,
right.
and I got two rejection letter or emails that were like the sweetest emails I ever got. One of them was Carole King.
Okay.
I'd asked to talk to her, and she said, John, she said, really appreciate you being a fan, because I said, I was always a big fan. And all this. She says, but I really don't do a lot of press anymore. I really, I'm semi-retired, and I probably could have followed it up with an, oh, come on, would you,
Yeah.
But I didn't want to be that guy. It's, hey, they said no, but they said it really nice.
Right.
And the other good rejection letter I got was from Glenn Campbell's wife. Because it said, hey, we'd love to have Glenn on. I had Jimmy Webb on one time, the great songwriter who
Right,
wrote,
right.
was really kind of the rocket fuel for Glenn's career,
Right.
And I dropped his name, I figured, okay, I'll get me in there. And a couple of days later, I got an email from his wife, and she says, John, she said, again, appreciate all the stuff you said, but she says, Glenn's just not in a real good place. We're trying to get him through this final tour. She says he doesn't do radio interviews anymore. She says he'll do some limited TV interviews, but that's only because I can be there with him
Right.
and kind of help him when he's having some problems and stuff like that. And I did see some of those interviews, and she was kind of the
Yeah.
lifesaver in that.
Did you see the documentary
I
on
did.
that? Yeah.
It was
yeah.
hard.
It was very, very hard to watch. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it really was.
But his family was great.
Oh man, and I said, man, that's a guy I just waited too long to talk to, because I was. Are you familiar with the Wrecking Crew and what they were?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I got to know a guy named Denny.
Because Glenn was part of the Wrecking Crew.
He was one of the
He's also
session
part
guitarists.
part of the Beach Boys.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. And
yeah.
that kind of came through the Wrecking Crew, because
Right.
they were the Wrecking Crew was this group of studio musicians that recorded basically all the pop, but not just pop, but all this music out in California from, I'm going to say, late 50s to early 70s.
Right.
I mean, they were a part of your movie themes, your TV themes, pop music, Frank Sinatra. It just went on and on and on. And I got in touch with a guy named Denny Tedesco, whose dad
Oh,
was
yeah.
Tommy Tedesco, the great
Right.
guitar player. You
Right.
hear his guitar and a lot of stuff. MASH is the one that really jumps out, that little guitar solo in that. Well, I struck up a friendship with him. He was putting together this movie, and what he was doing he was going to different markets, and he would charge admission, and that would allow him to buy the rights fees for these songs so that he could put this movie out. And we got him into Grand Rapids at the Wealthy Theater and all that stuff, and so we got to be pretty good friends. And he did we had a Legends segment too. That's what we would call these, if you're talking to Art Garfunkel or
Right,
Denny
right.
Tedesco or whoever it was. And he was great as well, and told us all the stories, and that would lead to another. Hey, you want to talk to Hal Blaine? Hal was like one of the greatest
Right,
session drummers
right.
ever, and it was
Now, the Wrecking Crew, is that the documentary that you were talking about that you let
Yes.
him to put?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've seen that a couple times, actually.
Yeah, it's great. So I think
Yeah.
you can run it like a Netflix now or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
or
yeah.
Maybe even on YouTube. He gave me a copy of it, and I wear it out. I just love
Oh,
that
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And
The other one was about the guys the session musicians that were at the Motown.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was heartbreaking too in
Yeah.
some ways, because the story of when like their last session, the story that I heard was they actually went to work. Barry had already decided to
To move to L.A. Yeah.
and a lot of these guys showed up to work like on a
Right.
Monday thinking they were going to go to work, and there was like a sign on the door of Hitsville that said move to LA. And the sad part was these guys weren't even invited to go along.
Right.
The heart and soul of the Funk Brothers. And I thought, wow.
James Jamerson too, as far as they said that's when they don't know if that's when he died because of
Right.
the 25th anniversary show. I mean, the Funk Brothers weren't really mentioned or anything in the 25th.
Yeah.
And
They didn't get the respect they
didn't get
deserved.
respect. No,
No.
and that's no respect. And it's like if you've seen that, you see that they came up with all these different little techniques to make these songs unique.
Right.
The hand clapping, the foot stomping, the certain bass notes that James Jameson's came up with, and
Yeah.
it was a very good I think I got the movie, but very good thing to watch. I think that's on Netflix now
Yeah.
too. You can watch it. So
And yeah, just you talk about the kismet of whatever, just the coming together of the songwriters, the musicians, Smokey Robinson, all of the Temptations. I mean, my gosh, all in this.
Stevie Wonder kind of learned from the Funk Brothers.
Yeah,
he hung out with them and found
Yeah, and one of the sad stories from that was, and it might have been Jamerson, but I'm not sure. It was one of the classic musicians, and he was having dinner with this reporter, and the reporter was going to do a story on the Funk Brothers, and they're sitting in a restaurant, and they're playing My Girl on the music.
Okay.
And you get the doon 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 doon,
Yeah.
and it's what this guy had played.
James, yeah.
And all of a sudden, you see his eyes light up, and he wants to say to the waiter, "Hey, that's me playing that."
Right.
And then he said, this writer says, all of a sudden I saw just really the light go out of his eyes, and he just sat back and looked at his menu again and ordered his food. And I said, weren't you tempted to say, "Hey, that's me"? He says, "Yeah, I was tempted," but he said, he wouldn't have cared. He wouldn't have known what that was or anything. And he said, man, one of the all-time great licks of all time, and who wouldn't be it? Well, I guess Jamerson was saying that guy would not believe me. He would say, "Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah,
You're just some old dude that's going to say that, and all that."
Well, that's all the writers that wrote the songs. They got all their credits and everything, but these guys came up with the licks that really made the songs what they were.
Yeah, because they weren't necessarily written in.
Right.
I mean,
Supremes. I don't think Supremes would have had all the hits they had if it wasn't for the
you're
Funk
absolutely
Brothers.
right. A lot of that, and the Wrecking Crew a lot of it was during the workouts of the song. Hey, how about if we added
Do
this?
that,
yeah. And it turned out to be the difference of the song.
And it was years later that I found out that Glenn Campbell was, such a a great player. I
couldn't read
didn't-
music though.
Yeah,
He couldn't read music,
But
but
he was good.
oh man,
Yeah.
phenomenal. Yeah,
And he stood in for the Beach Boys for Brian Wilson
right,
for a tour because Brian Wilson didn't want to tour anymore.
right.
And I mean, there you go. But anyway, I think you and I, since you and I could probably go on about that forever.
Yeah.
A few of your favorite people that you've worked with through the years. You think Rick, of course, is one, and
Yeah, Rick's,
Cal.
Yeah, Cal. Those are my two buds. I work with a guy who lives in this area. His name's Mike Taylor. He was a coach for a long
Mike,
time.
I know Mike.
Do you?
Oh yeah, Mike did.
I feel sorry
did
about
game.
that.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, that's
Mike
right. He
did
worked
games
with you
for
for
us
a
for a
while.
while. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
he did.
He is one funny man.
He is. He's
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, I met him back when he was an assistant coach with Dan. Well, Dan Roan was the head coach over at Fremont, but Mike was one of his assistants. And Mike told me back then, he says, I want to do this someday. I said, what? He said, what you guys are doing? I said, geez. I said, don't pay anything. He said, no, I just want, and he's a natural. He can tell all the stories.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a guy, Kalamazoo, coached every level. I mean,
Yeah.
from high school to college. I didn't coach in pros, but worked with Bo over at University of Michigan, some of those stories. And yeah, he's never
He's been
lost
fired
for
quite a
words.
few places too. Yeah.
Yeah. He always says he did it right though, because he didn't get married until his coaching was pretty much done.
Yeah.
Because obviously you got to go wherever the job is. And
But Mike was working for you guys, I think then, and I can't remember when that was exactly. But
Yeah,
he was doing a little a sports show with you, right?
we done the Power Hour together. We did that up until I wasn't there any longer. In fact, we're one of the things we might do is see if we can bring that back in some way, shape, or form with online or something like that. We're certainly open to doing something like that again. I mean, he loved doing that, and I did too. So
And he's good at it. He is good at it.
I mean, he knows everybody. He knows, if he doesn't know, he knows somebody who knows. I mean, he's got.
Ask him if he remembers me. I'm sure
he does.
Sure, he'll have a few choice words. But yeah.
No, he does. He mentioned that that he'd worked with you before. So, and said, Rick said, I got a surprise for you. Here's a blast from the past, and it was Klaus. And we talked probably for 10 minutes on the air, just kind of reminiscing and all that. And yeah, he was had a great voice. I remember the first time I met him, he was on the air. I mean, it was like I was in the studio getting ready to engineer the show. I'd not met Klaus, and I remember this little guy because he was pretty diminutive, sitting in a chair, and I remember thinking, wow. Klaus is going to be kind of mad when he comes in. This guy's going to have to get out of there. And all of a sudden, this guy's looking at me, and it's 7 o'clock or whatever it is that go on, or 6 o'clock, and I'm hitting the opener, and I'm thinking, wow. this guy's cutting it close, and all of a sudden, Mike opens. This is Klaus Helfer. Wow, holy cow! Because I didn't even have like the little handshake before or anything like that. I mean, I'd gotten there, and he'd kind of come in late that day or whatever it was, and so the first time I heard his voice was when he was on the air. At that time, I thought, well,
Okay, so what's the plans? What's up?
well, right now, I'm really kind of busy just trying to get stuff together, like insurances, and making sure that's all taken care of. I've got kind of a window of like 12 weeks where I'm kind of taken care of here. So what I'm really using this, Oscar, is to not jump at the first thing. I mean, if I'm going to work at Taco Bell, I didn't nothing against that, but I didn't want that to be my first jump off.
I heard you can make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Yeah. The Getty Street Grill has offered. Yeah. Ron over there has graciously offered me that. But I've got some irons in the fire. Like I said, the thing I'm still intrigued with doing high school sports, but I know a guy that I've worked with that runs a streams games. He's in the southern part of Michigan. He also is connected with the MHSAA. He's kind of offered a set down and see what we could do. He's more into getting with a school and then doing everything. In other words, you're doing football, doing basketball, both boys and girls, and softball and all that.
Oh yeah, yay!
My thing is, and Hickman might come back into this and help with sales, and my goal is to show that maybe we can make enough money that we could do a game of the week. That's not his forte. He doesn't really like that, so I might have some convincing to do on that. But if I come back, I would like to stay with the game, especially football. I mean, baseball and that other stuff is all negotiable. I get that, because the audience isn't as great for those. I mean, if you wanted to specialize then somehow, I don't know how that all would look. But that's the answer. I got some meetings next week with them. I've already had some really good meetings, with some folks on. The problem is if I can piece enough contractual work together to make a living to replace. Not that I was making a ton of money, but and it's not about money necessarily. But I always say until the gas company doesn't think that money is important, and the electric company doesn't think money is important, and the landlord doesn't think money is important, I got to think money is important, So, you got to pay the bills. So, but I would love to stay in this at some way, shape, or form. I mean, I love what you're doing with the not only the audio but the visual. I know audio editing and all that, but someday I'd like to learn a little bit more about the video. I'd like to maybe even work on documentaries or something like that. I mean, just see where it can go and all that type of stuff. So, I really don't know what's out there. I'm 99% sure I'm going to land again in broadcasting. Probably is not going to be terrestrial radio again. I mean, because I don't want to talk bad about anybody or anything, but it's you're very blessed if you can find a non-corporate owned station anymore. I mean, and you got somebody that can, has a vision for you. And
the ones that aren't corporate don't have any money either. So
exactly, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And radio is just the canary in the coal mine, as I always say, is and I'm sure you were in this thing too. You're a 16, 17-year-old kid, and you're taking your tapes and you're banging on doors and you're saying, "Hey, can I get in here?" You know what? The last 10 years, I'm not seeing kids come into a radio station and say, hey, I really would like to work here. I mean,
is Specs Howard still open?
I don't know. Man, I used to, and I'm not trying to dog anybody that ever went there, because that was one of the, and I thought, man, why would you want to go to a school and you're never going to be able to recover the money and your tuition and the job, unless you're, I mean, I know you could land in New York and all that stuff, and that could happen.
I know, I've only known one person. His name was Mike something. I couldn't remember his real name, but he went as Kenny Calvin, and he was at Rock 95 when we were over there. And he did land a job in Lansing for a little while after that, but he ended up going back to concessions at Tiger Stadium.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, made more money there than he did doing anything in radio.
Yeah.
So
I used to always call Specs Howard just as just the sense of humor I have is the Shemp Howard School. Of
there you go.
Well, thank you, Oscar. Appreciate the invitation, and it certainly is a thrill to come in and see your operation here. And I'll tell you what, you've been doing this about as long as I have too. So I mean, you're certainly
Close to
fit,
40 years, not quite the 40-year
but
mark.
we got similar stories, know similar people, and
Yeah.
similar experiences. So I mean, you certainly fit. Whatever you should be up here doing a thing. I mean, I know you
wouldn't have anybody to interview me.
you have to talk to yourself, right? Yeah. No, but no. Thank you for doing that, and keep and I know you're very good at with the cartoons and some of the things that you're doing, and I really appreciate that because if we ever needed local radio, I mean we still need that connection. We can't have everything canned.
Well, the one nice thing about it now is that I have plenty of out of work.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
out of work DJs to talk about it. So there you go.
We got our own little club here.
Yeah, we got our club. Yeah, we should start that. That could be the radio show. The out of work DJs.
Yeah, the out of work DJs. Yeah. So
all right.
Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you.